Going through a lot of great information. Amazing discussions earlier. So, a lot of information being thrown around shared value, which is important, building stuff into the DNA of the company. But again, I'm coming at, so we talked about NGOs and, the scarcity of NGOs where you can invest. How do you get scale? So I'm going to try and hit on some of those issues as we deal with this. And so very briefly, just about myself, I come from an entrepreneurial background. I've been in an NGO now, which is an Environmental Defense Fund, a New York-based global NGO, for about 6 years. It's a very different kind of an NGO. We are very economics-based, science-based. The Economist and Wall Street Journal call us the most economically literate NGO out there, which sometimes can be a burden and sometimes a good thing. In this case, hopefully, it's a good thing. So we started I got excited about this whole CSR concept. Ashokji actually talked about the gentleman who was very excited about the 2%. That would be me. And he's absolutely right. It has to actually be in the DNA of the firm. Sustainability has to be about cradle to cradle. Management has to participate and lead from the front, because all that is really, really key. But all that starts with the conversation. And the role of the government in driving a policy agenda, creating a 2%, can help spark a conversation. And that can drive a larger change in mindsets. And it's going to be an evolving process. So I'm kind of excited about that. So we are EDF works globally. I look after work in the Southeast Asia region. And one of the other things we did here, so we talked about shared values, shared concepts, CSR. Really also, I think we said, let's broaden this conversation. If you really want to get work done on the ground, how do we do this? It's not NGOs don't have the corner on wisdom on everything to be done on the ground. Neither do the businesses, neither do the academics. It needs bankers, scientists, academic agencies. And somebody mentioned about measuring impacts. NGOs can't measure impacts all the time. You need to get it right. You need to run randomized control trials. I didn't even know what a randomized control trial was, but I really was interested in impacts and have started learning about it. So you need funding agencies. So when this 2% idea came up, I was like, this is great. It's risk capital. It's a way for businesses to lean in and say, hey, I want to float some trial balloons. I want to try and do things that can be scalable. You can put your metrics in there. I want businesses to engage with NGOs in a way that brings NGOs up. Put your KPIs in there. You need to have your metrics. You need to see the change that's going to happen on the ground. You need to get those on-the-ground agencies to start understanding that these metrics matter. I need to measure my baselines. I need to know where I'm going. If I'm not going to have the information, I'm not going to know where I'm going. And then you've got to have a theory of scale around it. So that's kind of what we did. We created this network, an open network. And we come at all of this from a very, there's the whole Schedule 7 was talked about, and there's a whole bunch of information in there. And we talked about how those things are interdependent, connected. It's true. But we come at it from a very particular point, and what I'm going to do over this next 30 minutes or 25 minutes is just talk about how we're thinking about things. Again, this is an imagination exercise. We don't have the corner on it, but we would like to figure out how to get this right. So one of the things that EDF is concerned about and the Fair Climate Network is concerned about, and the network is over 35 NGOs now, so we have a huge partnership and individuals and bankers and everybody else. So we're trying to get the best of thinking from different places. So this is a major concern for us. If you want to talk about sustainability over the long run, the gentleman from Microsoft talked about it, the gentleman from Tata talked about CO2 accounting in buildings. There are some real issues. And we need to understand where we are. The climate change is an issue. It is something that's going to affect us all. We, as human beings, as hominids, have never seen these kind of concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and temperature is rising, and the world is collectively trying to think this through and figure it out. But anything when we talk about long-term sustainability has to take that into account. And the most vulnerable people when it comes to climate change and environment are sitting in this little circle. More than half the world lives in this little circle. And a lot of the poor part of the world lives in this circle. So trying to figure this out is also important. So when you start talking about inclusive growth, I want to be very specific. So let's say CSR, there's education and a whole bunch of things, but we came at it from the angle of energy access. It's the government's mantra here as well. We've been talking about it all the time, and it's really exciting times. But energy is closely tied to development. Clean cooking, clean energy access, just generating incomes, just basics. And the number of people in this country who don't have energy access, clean cooking, are phenomenal. I mean, like, just no electricity equivalent to the population of the United States. No refrigeration, US, Brazil, Japan, Mexico combined. Cooking on firewood and dung, population of US and all of the EU. And those are some real issues. The gentleman from Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, he was talking about the economic impacts, broader health impacts. Here's just from clean cooking issues. Data run by World Bank in 2009 talked about economic impacts on GDP drag of 1.3% on the low side, high side 2.5%. That's a big number. We need to deal with it. And we were talking about 6.4% on the bigger side. So how do we get this right? Other thing is food security. When you look at climate change, we are going to have a growing population in this country. We need to feed our population. A lot of our country is going to remain rural, no matter how much we talk about urbanization. If you imagine India of 2040, we're going to have a 1.5 billion people population at a 50% urban rate. We're still going to be more people living in the rural sector than we are today. Just that's the reality, folks. So we got to figure out how those people are going to be feeding themselves, are going to be feeding the others, and are going to be sort of developing in the process as well. So again, start thinking slightly longer term, beyond 5-10 years, and the picture is pretty stark. And we're looking at, under climate change scenarios, you're looking at some serious impacts on yield. And then add water issues to it, energy access, and we have a real conundrum on our hands. So where we come at it is, we sort of focus on rural development, and that's a big chunk of the country, about 700 million, 140 million households. As per the last national sample survey, 148 million households. And we said, look, what can we do? So on farming systems, there's ways to do energy savings. You can focus on resource use efficiency. You can improve yield. Development, profitability. Can we clearly demonstrate profitability improvement? Can we demonstrate food security? And can we measure environmental impacts? Simple leaps, again, not permanent solutions. Going from a basic chula, and I love the chula because I grew up with my grandma cooking on this in Banaras. I'm from Banaras. And I grew up in Bihar. So I mean, I've seen, so it's not a big leap. It's a small technology leap. It's not a final leap as well. It's a bridge. But just getting people to start moving, this little step cleans up the indoor air pollution by about 50%. I mean, it reduces firewood usage by 50%. Or if you have some cows and, if you have some cows and moving to a biogas unit, basic investment requirements, but much cleaner air on the inside. You're talking about sort of child health issues. Stunted development was talked about. People talk about demographic dividend. Let's talk about stunted development. That's a demographic lock-in of demographic deficit. You're not allowing a child to grow up to its own potential. So you can improve indoor air quality, you can improve health, you can free up time from collecting firewoods, and you can really start measuring economic effects and health effects of these interventions. And then we talk about energy access. Everybody's talking about it, and it's important, and the government is really leading the charge on this, and it's wonderful to see. So, but how do you do this? The point is, we can imagine this, we want these things done, but getting it done is the real challenge here. I mean, we've been talking about energy access for all since I was a kid, and I'm 48. And so thinking about that, sort of, that there's an issue here. We need to resolve this, and we're moving forward, but I think we need to move forward harder and faster. And hence, having the CSR idea come in was very exciting to me because it releases some risk capital into the space. So you need institutions on the ground, boots on the ground. You need baseline information, just like running a company. You need to know where you are, where you want to go. You need participatory approaches. You need you need to meet the local needs, economic growth, poverty alleviation. The resources are there. Vipin talked about, you don't need the money to build the toilet. You need the buy-in. So you need local resources from the household. Budgetary resources are there. CSR resources are there. And you got to tie it all together. You look at microloans. So how can we bring the financing where the financing is needed? How do we thread that needle? And then you got to sort of execute, but you got to do it in a very transparent, accountable way and get it to where it can be scaled up. So we work right now in about 8 states as this network, and it's been a really exciting experience. We've been doing this for about 5-6 years. So the way we do all of this work is basically we collected a lot of demographic data. So we're living in this day of information technology. So we said, let's see where we are. The NGOs wanted to know where they were. They had their own demands. I was like, well, let's see if we can just put in a better cooking system. But they're like, well, we want to understand what kind of houses people live in, what the costs are, gender issues are. We want to look at inclusive growth, inclusive development. So it was a real good learning exercise for me. So we collected a whole bunch of information at the household level, census level. We started looking at farms, what exists on farms, what's the nearest source of water, how are they farming at the farm level, what's the efficiency of farming, what are the yields, how can we figure out ways to improve profits for the farmer. How do we sort of implement all this? Can we create an ecosystem that actually generates employment locally? I'm not going to airdrop a solution in. If you could build a biogas unit, can we train the locals to actually build these, get them right, get them to spec? Can we create an ecosystem where we can work with women to provide after-sales support when biogas systems break down? What kind of income effects are there as a result of that particular intervention? How much water is being saved? Change the way you farm rice. Can you save water? We have a water issue in this country. And we are finding that you can save about 35 to 40% water. We did this in Vietnam, and Vietnam government is now saying, hey, we want to think about changing this because we have a water issue. We want to sort of look at this new farm policy for rice for the Mekong Delta. And there's a lot of monitoring and reporting. So we have created systems from the ground up to do this. And the reasoning is, there's a lot of information. You don't need to get into it. But, this is the first time a farmer is keeping a farmer's diary. And I thought they were doing it for me. So I remember sitting with my chief scientist and meeting with these farmers. And the farmers are going, we're saying, this is really exciting. I can see that the yields are improving. Your fertilizer use is down. This is great. Thank you. And we asked the question, so how do you find this useful? And they're like, sir, for the first time, I have a record of what I did last year. I actually know what my profit is. I'm separating profit from yield. So interesting outlook. So what we decided was then suddenly, oh no, we need to turn this around and give it back to the farmer. So it was a huge learning curve again. So I'm sort of learning to question my own assumptions every time, and there's a lot of learning going on. But in the end, we said, let's leverage ICT. So we've come up with systems to actually try and figure out ways to use information and communication technology to deliver this. So you can now go in, and all these NGOs that we work with can go in and see at the household level what is going on, what exists on the ground. It improves the decision matrix in terms of, if you now go in and ask them. 6 years ago, I'd go and ask somebody and say, hey, how many people do you work with? They couldn't tell me. Now they can tell me exactly. Or how many individuals in your households or constituency are widow-led households? That answer was not really available. Now it is, and they can start thinking about leveraging government programs to deliver those services or helping those folks. Same thing with biogas units, so we know exactly who's using the biogas, what the impacts are at home. We have data on the family. Really exciting stuff. This is an NGO down south that really does terrific work. So you know exactly how many villages the biogas units are in. And this light's right in my eye, so I can't really read much. But we know how many are male-headed, female-headed households, scheduled costs, active members of the community, how many are active families. We know how many biogas are commissioned. In this case, it was 5,488, used for 16 million days, 331,000 days it was not working, and these are results from yesterday, up-to-date information. So really helps on the ground to know exactly where you're headed. And this sort of, again, we are learning from the best of the best, which is industry as well, saying how do we sort of translate this and make it more publicly available for folks to use, to make better decisions. So now you have NGOs that we're trying to put up on a map on Google Earth. And we say, okay, fine. We had a tie-up with Indigo Airlines, somebody sitting here. And they were like, well, let's try and sort of put in these systems to improve indoor air quality, improve household economics, improve child health. So what do you suggest? So we said, and reduce emissions. So we said, let's do biogas units. So we started implementing the program, and they have full visibility into it. So they're seeing what their returns on that investment is. But not only that, if you dig in, I'm not online, but if you dig in, all villages pop up. And for every village, we can see who the investor is, what are the number of units installed, how many are under construction, days of use, emission reductions, other impacts. So if it was a live site, you would be able to sort of click on the name. I find it really hard to pronounce it, but Pedathamara Gunta. So you can actually click on it and go dive into the family and see what's going on. And if you click again on the village, you go in and on satellite images, you can see every household that the unit's been installed in and what's going on in that household. So it's really exciting from our point of view to try and sort of leverage these new technologies, and government is beginning to think of that, and I'll talk about that in a minute as well. So similarly we're looking at in this case, solar lighting. We're installing solar lights. So where is it being installed? Which houses? What's going on in those houses? Farming, we're doing soil health cards and a whole bunch of other things. So we sort of started thinking about this 5 years ago. So we started sort of doing GPS unit markings of the farms, trying to understand exactly how do you improve farming. So in this case, we want to identify all the farms that are level with a particular kind of soil type, and we can bring them up. Not only can we bring them up, we can actually zoom right into them and see the farm and see what exists, what kind of trees exist, how big are they, does the farmer intend to keep it, cut it, farmer data, really useful. And we're building on this now. We're trying to talk to NASA and others to see, can we predict yields? So why is all this important? I mean, it's important because really, if 50% of the country is going to be in the rural sector, and this is like 30 years out, and development and inclusive growth is not something we're going to be able to solve in 5 years, we really need to start thinking creatively about how to solve this. And we need to measure these impacts and then sort of figure out how to scale this up. So we're measuring across the board. We're measuring yields, we're measuring environmental impacts, gender issues, economic impacts. On biogas units, we recently did a study, and here's just examples I'm throwing out for your thought. I mean, this is supposed to just food for thought for future discussions on the sidelines. So on biogas impacts, we were so stunned, absolutely stunned to learn. We asked Columbia University and a local university, IISc, to do the study. And we were stunned to learn that nobody had done this study before, but if you change a cooking system, the nutrition of the household changes. We didn't know how much. So we ran a randomized controlled trials, and we found out that, well, they're moving from a diet rich in ABC to a more diversified diet, which actually has long-term ramifications on childhood health, childhood learning, but also because of all this that's going on and reduced time and savings of collecting of firewood, childhood school attendance is improving, health impacts are changing. So there's a lot that goes on with that one intervention. And so here I just talked about Indigo. So one of the companies we leaned forward with in CSR was Indigo's doing some really interesting stuff. I mean, they're a very progressive company. I know that Institute of Competitiveness actually recognized them last year with the Porter Prize. And they're really working, I think, on embedding sustainability within the DNA of the company. But one of the things they're going beyond CSR is they're asking their passengers to sort of look at reducing their pollution from flying. And they said, hey, you have an option to opt in and reduce your pollution from flying and do some good. So passengers are doing that. And that's how sort of money flows out to the work on the ground, and they get their metrics in return. So we're actually asking NGOs to use market drivers and meet market demands on transparency and accountability. So yields are maintained in our case. The developmental impacts are real, and this is inclusive growth. I mean, we want to make sure that this happens. And energy is delivered or saved, or emissions are avoided or reduced. But really, it's about serving the national agenda. Food security is maintained, development issues are being taken care of, energy access, energy security is being taken care of. In some ways, not completely. It's, this is part of the equation, the solution. But really, NGOs cannot, we can, in the best of the world, we are right now working with 370,000 families. The program has grown, it's created a space for peer-to-peer learning, and NGOs are learning in the process. We have 40 projects at hand, and this is growing exponentially every few months. But really, NGOs can only do that much. I mean, it's the NGO's job to maybe demonstrate the value of a school within walking distance of every child in this country, but it is the policymakers and the government to actually build it and do it in a way that actually continues to measure the impacts and see the results. So NGOs can actually demonstrate the value, and I think now NGOs can go beyond, and governments are willing to do this as well. So we can start thinking about new business models of working with government to deliver that change. So our thinking is, how do we move from projects to a jurisdictional approach? How do we take these interventions? So we don't want to stop at going from NGO to NGO and using investments to deliver change one step at a time, but to create a model for change that's scalable. So that's where CSR to me becomes very exciting, because it releases this pool of risk capital to do these trial balloons, run these sandboxes, and then figure out a model that then you can go to the government and say, hey guys, this is something really interesting. You all are really this government or India as a whole, the country, is changing. And it's an exciting time. There's less inertia. So when there's less inertia, you're sort of open to new thinking. People are talking about soil health cards, digitization of landscapes, financial inclusion. We have to start thinking as NGOs on how to leverage all that as well, and how to embed our systems within the government systems and deliver change at some scale. So we need to really start thinking about how do we do that. And as I said, so there's a whole bunch that's going on, and then as you as business sector start thinking about sustainable and inclusive growth, more and more the conversation happens. I think it opens up a space to do a whole lot of experimentation. So that's kind of where we are at, and what we've learned is basically, if you think of the units, biogas or better cook stove or solar lighting or whatever as an application, what's important is the underlying operating system. We've had an issue here on operating system, which is the last mile delivery. Intent is always there, but getting that operating system right to deliver that change is really important, both at the local level and at some scale. So creating that operating system was our main aim. And the other thing we learned was basically that it's important to embrace complexity. It's complex things are more resilient. It's good. So let's not just look at something in its simplicity and say, this is what I want to, this is one intervention, I want to do this and walk away. Really, it has cascades of effects, and understanding those effects and creating participatory approaches really helps. You disaggregate the complexity so that it can be implemented, but embrace the complexity as a whole. And partnerships are important. So as I said, started with that whole idea of creating a network of peer-to-peer learning and learning from different levels within society. I think we learned a hell of a lot. We learned about how to generate funds. We learned about how to measure impacts. We learned about, I think we tied up with IIM recently in Bangalore when we found out that NGO leaders could use with some management skills. So IIM Bangalore sort of offered a 2-year program and said every month the leaders can come in and get some management skills. We tied up with Best Practices Institute to work with line management and staff to actually do better bookkeeping practices, take better decisions, learn how to use information systems better. So all that's important, and an NGO alone can't do this. So casting a wider net helps. And so what we found out is that it is possible to have sustainable and low carbon development approaches. We are measuring the change and we're seeing it's real. And we need more information or more effort to get better farm data, et cetera. And we recognize that these applications are not permanent. When I see a woman cooking on firewood and or messing with dung to put it into a biogas unit, my desire is not that that woman should be doing that or that person should be doing that for the rest of their lives. My desire is that they should get away from it as fast as possible. So the decision matrix that's going through my head is, will they do it for 6 years? Because that's the payback period of that investment. So if it costs 11,000 rupees to put a biogas unit in, and if the payback period is 6 years without taking into account environmental effects and other effects, that's good enough for me. After 6 years, I want to make sure that that person is into an LPG and a better lifestyle, which is hopefully less environmentally impactful, but it's absolutely doable. But the operating systems, what I want us to focus on. So I'll leave it at that. I ran through it because I think we're running short on time. So I hopefully I did this justice, and I'm happy to talk to you all on the sidelines. Thank you.
Thanks, Richie. That was wonderful. And I really appreciate the fact that you're focusing on matrix, and especially when it comes to the outreach program and actually looking at the rural areas, matrix would do wonders, because that's something which we kind of grapple with. So as far as the matrix is concerned, you said about the farmer or the farm soil quality and assessment. It's just starting. Could you just throw a little bit more light on that, on what you're doing and what you're planning to do with it? Like, what's the end goal on that?
So look, we started looking at farm profitability. We said, hey, how can we promote resource use efficiency on the ground and on the ground at the farm level? Now that starts with gathering good information. So the government is now rolling out the soil health cards. So our job, we didn't see that coming 5 years ago. We were like, let's figure out a way to deliver this change. So can we measure soil quality? Can we figure out what's the nearest source of water? Can we figure out how to provide drip irrigation systems, and what are the impacts on yields, and can we do this in a scalable way? So we started sort of measuring all that, and now what's happened is when the government starts talking about soil health cards, we get totally excited. We're like, oh, well, this is great. So instead of talking about the utility of soil health cards, now the conversation is turning to how can we work with government to make sure that the data being generated from soil health cards is accessible to all and is of the right quality. But so the matrix changed as well. So right now, initially our job was to look at growth and farm yields, and then next now we're moving towards trying to figure out how to work with governments.
So the data which you said should be available, is it available for public consumption? Or?
No, so that's for the NGOs. I don't open it, it's up to the NGO to open it to the public. It's not my domain.
Probably I'll connect with you and see how we can figure
it out.
Yeah,
you can certainly come in and see some of that data. And we open it to, the NGOs are very open to opening it to academics to do the studies, and there's a whole bunch of PhDs that are being generated out of this.
Yeah, so PhD is one thing. I'm looking at more from the financial implications, or actually getting some projects, viable projects based on that data, because most of the times we grapple for the data and the feasibility, but yeah, once we have the data, lo behold, you have your project.
Absolutely. We have about 500,000 houses worth of data.
Absolutely. So probably I'll connect with you a little bit offline.
Sure.
Richie, we come in from myself, Sumit Dhanuka from the SAR group. We understand that you're operating across 4 or 5 of these avenues for the last 4 or 5 years, and you mentioned that you've been sort of running multiple projects. Just want to bounce off thoughts like, we see a lot of, so there is NGOs in the ecosystem, and you have social entrepreneurs who are running startup ventures as social ventures, which are not CSR mandated, but are sustainable in their own way.
Right.
So, projects with NGOs versus investing into social ventures and then delivering social impact. How do you see this, parallel?
Given the enormity of the problem out here, both apply. It's not either or. I think we need both. We need as many social ventures out there, social investments. We need people like Harish Hande from Selco trying to deliver energy access to folks at a reasonable price, as well as we need NGOs creating models that can work with governments and learn from governments to deliver energy access at a reasonable transaction cost for the government as well. So both ways it works. So I wouldn't say it's either or.
Sure, thanks.
Anything else? We good? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Richie. Thanks a lot for joining us today. In fact, let's have a quick break now, but a very quick snapshot in terms of what I really understood. Like there is this huge power of information that can actually help us transform the way we are actually helping people and helping society. And if we can actually look at that granularity of data and create models around it, it's going to be stunning. In fact, the work that we are looking at doing on social progress is effectively a similar kind of a thing, and we have had a chat on that in terms of like mapping as to what is happening in various districts, and then trying to define what needs to be done. Going beyond a very cliched way of really looking at projects and doing something which actually helps people, helps society, and create a larger impact. So great, so thanks a lot for joining us for Richie's talk as well. We'll just have a quick break. Let's go get out for coffee, and we'll be back in exactly 15 minutes, please, for the next panel. 15 minutes. Thank you.